The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts, featuring characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. Jesse James was an American outlaw, bank and train robber, guerrilla, and leader of the James YoungerGang in the American Old West. Jesse Woodson James was born on September 5, 1847 in Kearney, Missouri. Raised in the Little Dixie area of western Missouri, James and his family maintained strong Southern sympathies. James had two full siblings, his elder brother, Alexander Franklin James, and a younger sister, Susan Lavinia James. Jesse and his brother Frank James were educated and hailed from a prestigious family of farmers. Their father, the Reverend Robert James, was a Baptist minister who married Zeralda Cole James and moved from Kentucky to Missouri in 1842. In the summer of 1863, the James farm was brutally attacked by Union soldiers. He and Frank James joined pro-Confederate guerrillas known as bushwhackers operating in Missouri and Kansas during the American Civil War when Jesse was 16 years old. As followers of William Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson, they were accused of committing atrocities against Union soldiers and civilian abolitionists, including the Centralia Massacre in 1864. Some historians accused Jesse and Frank of being cruel to Union soldiers, while others argue that it was the brutal treatment the brothers received that turned them to a life of crime. Either way, they rebelled against harsh post-war civil legislation and took the law into their own hands. As members of various gangs of outlaws, Jesse and Frank robbed banks, stagecoaches, and trains across the Midwest, gaining national fame and often popular sympathy despite the brutality of their crimes. There has been speculation that the boys and their gangs were like Robin Hood, robbing the rich and giving to the poor, but there is no evidence for that. Most likely, they kept the money for themselves. From 1860 to 1882, the James Gang was the most feared band of outlaws in American history, responsible for more than 20 bank and train robberies and the murders of countless individuals who stood in their way. They stole an estimated $200,000. They were legends in their own time, popular in Missouri for actively trying to further the Confederate cause. On December 7, 1869, the gang robbed the Gallatin, Missouri bank. Jesse asked to change a $100 bill and, thinking that the banker was responsible for the death of Bloody Bill, shot the man in the heart. Local newspapers labeled the actions vicious and bloodthirsty and called for the gang's capture. From that robbery to the end of their careers, members of the James Gang had a price on their heads, dead or alive. As a result of their attempted robbery of a bank in Northfield, Minnesota, several members of the gang were captured or killed. The 1869 robbery marked the emergence of Jesse James as the most famous survivor of the former Confederate bushwhackers. It was the first time he was publicly labeled an outlaw. Missouri Governor Thomas T. Crittenden set a reward for his capture. They continued in crime for several years afterward, recruiting new members, but came under increasing pressure from law enforcement seeking to bring them to justice. Though protected by their community, they were always on the move. Meanwhile, the James brothers joined with Cole Younger and his brothers John, Jim, and Bob, as well as Cleo Miller and other former Confederates, to form what came to be known as the James Younger Gang. With Jesse James as the most public face of the gang, though with operational leadership likely shared among the group, the gang carried out a string of robberies from Iowa to Texas and from Kansas to West Virginia. They robbed banks, stagecoaches, and a fair in Kansas City, often carrying out their crimes in front of crowds and even hamming it up for the bystanders. In 1874, the Adams Express Company turned to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency to stop the James Younger Gang. The Chicago-based agency worked primarily against urban professional criminals, as well as providing industrial security, such as strike breaking. Because the gang received support by many former Confederate soldiers in Missouri, they eluded the Pinkertons. Joseph Whitcher, an agent dispatched to infiltrate Zeralda Samuel's farm, was soon found killed. Two other agents, Captain Louis J. Lull and John Boyle, were sent after the Youngers. Lull was killed by two of the Youngers in a roadside gunfight on March 17, 1874. Before he died, Lull fatally shot John Younger. A deputy sheriff named Edwin Daniels also died in the skirmish. Allan Pinkerton, the agency's founder and leader, took on the case as a personal vendetta. He began to work with former Unionists who lived near the James family farm. On the night of January 25, 1875, he staged a raid on the homestead. Detectives threw an incendiary device into the house. It exploded, killing James' young half-brother Archie and blowing off one of Zeralda Samuel's arms. Afterward, Pinkerton denied that the raid's intent was arson. But a letter was located later written by Pinkerton declaring his intention to burn the house down. Many residents were outraged by the raid on the family home. The Missouri State Legislature narrowly defeated a bill that praised the James and Younger brothers and offered them amnesty. On September 7, 1876, the opening day of hunting season in Minnesota, the James Younger Gang attempted a raid on the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. The robbery quickly went wrong, however, and after the robbery, only Frank and Jesse James remained alive and free. Later in 1876, Jesse and Frank James surfaced in the Nashville, Tennessee area, where they went by the names of Thomas Howard and B.J. Woodson, respectively. Frank seemed to want to settle down, but Jesse remained restless. Even after other members of the gang had been killed and their friends the Youngers had been sent to prison for 25 years, in 1879, the James brothers planned one more robbery with Charlie and Bob Ford. Little did they know that Governor Crittenden of Missouri had put together a reward fund so large that the Fords had turned traitor to earn it and also collect a promised amnesty for his previous crimes. Crittenden had made the capture of the James brothers his top priority. In his inaugural address, he declared that no political motives could be allowed to keep them from justice. Barred by law from offering a large reward, he had turned to the railroad and express corporations to put up a $5,000 bounty for the delivery of each of them and an additional $5,000 for the conviction of either of them. On April 3, 1882, after eating breakfast, the Fords and Jameses went into the living room before traveling to Platte City for a robbery. From the newspaper, James had just learned that gang member Dick Little had confessed to participating in Wood Heights' murder. He was suspicious that the Fords had not told him about it. Bob Ford later said he believed that James had realized they were there to betray him. Instead of confronting them, James walked across the living room and laid his revolvers on a sofa. He turned around and noticed a dusty pitcher above the mantel and stood on a chair to clean it. Robert Ford drew his weapon and shot the unarmed Jesse James in the back of the head. James' two previous bullet wounds and partially missing middle finger served to positively identify the body. The death of Jesse James became a national sensation. The Fords made no attempt to hide their role. Robert Ford wired the governor to claim his reward. Crowds pressed into the little house in St. Joseph to see the dead bandit. The Ford brothers surrendered to the authorities and were dismayed to be charged with first-degree murder. In the course of a single day, the Ford brothers were indicted, pleaded guilty, were sentenced to death by hanging, and were granted a full pardon by Governor Crittenden. People in Missouri were outraged at the method used to capture him and considered it a cowardly assassination. Within 3 months, Frank surrendered to Crittenden. The juries would not convict on the meager evidence, so Frank resumed a quiet life. Already a celebrity in life, James became a legendary figure of the Wild West after his death. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twysted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!